Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. As you may or may not know, you are in the Canton High School auditorium. And we welcome you here to the Canton League of Women Voters Candidates Forum. And tonight we are very fortunate to have 3 different races represented. We have the regional probate judges who are already seated on the stage. We have the 17th district representatives and the 8th district Senate race being represented. Unfortunately, Leslie Hill is unable to make it this evening. She is with a terminally ill family member, so please keep her in mind in your thoughts. She has a written statement that she will be having read tonight, so you will be able to hear from her, if not in person, at least by her written words. Tonight, if you hear of your friends or family that were not able to join you live tonight in this auditorium, this broadcast is being videotaped, and it will be played both on Nutmeg TV and it will be available via YouTube on the Canton League of Women Voters website. So those times will be posted, and if you weren't able to come, or you know of someone that wasn't able to come but is interested in hearing the candidates' views on the issues, please encourage them to watch one of the airings. This forum is brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Canton. Our primary purpose is to engage and educate voters. And we welcome you all to please be good listeners and to please be respectful of all of the people that have done a lot of work putting on this event. And please show an example to all of our student volunteers who are here. The student volunteers are over here. Raise your hand if you're a student volunteer. The student volunteers, they will be circulating throughout the evening with pencils and note cards if you would like to write your questions down, and then they will be bringing them forward to the question reviewers and then up to the moderator. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, they'll give you a card. If you're done writing out your question, just raise your hand again and one of them will be by to pick up the note card from you. This evening's moderator is Meg Gaines. And again, I please ask you to be respectful to those sitting around you, that everyone is here to listen. And someone once told me there is a reason why we have one mouth and 2 ears, and we should use them accordingly. Thank you all for coming.
So now it's my turn. I'm Meg Gaines, moderator for tonight. I will reiterate, we ask that you withhold applause or comments or displays of approval or disapproval until the end of each section. The format for tonight, first the probate judges candidates. Each will get 2 minutes to answer a question. They will each get the same question, going back and forth, and they can have up to 2 minutes to answer. They also can talk back and forth. After that, you have a 5-minute time, a time bank. So the timers will be timing, and you will use it up as you go back and forth. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Do you know what I mean? You can say no. I can try again. But topic A, the other candidate speaks, and you're like, I have something I want to say about that. You can talk additionally. You can have some more time. Okay? Okay. I know this is your first time for both of you. It'll all work out. It'll be good. Okay. So we will start. First of all, our candidates are the current probate judge, Cynthia Becker, and I know it goes against the grain, and the other candidate is Charles Chip Houlihan. And now we're done with the clapping until the end, okay? Okay. First question goes to Ms. Becker. What is your opinion of the outcome of the 2011 reorganization of the probate system that created a regional probate court for the Farmington Valley towns?
Well, that's a great question. When they first started talking about consolidation, I was not in favor of it because I was concerned that the residents in the towns were going to lose services. They were going to have to travel a great distance. Many of our users were elderly or disabled. So they would be at a disadvantage having to travel a great distance, and the courts were at that time able to sustain themselves with the fees. However, I'm very, very pleased to state that my fears were not realized, that the regionalization of the courts has been a great success. Other than the fact that people have to travel a little bit further, we've been able to get around that because I go to people. So if a person who's the subject of a proceeding is not able to come to the courts, I go to them. I travel to nursing homes, hospitals, psychiatric institutions. I've had hearings at people's kitchen tables so that they have an opportunity to participate. So from that perspective, my fears did not come to bear, and I believe that we have fiscally been very, the regionalization has been very beneficial. We've been able to save some money. We have one court now housed under one roof instead of 4 separate courts housed under 4 roofs. So it really has been a tremendous thing. The staff has come together under my leadership. I've been able to consolidate the staff from 4 courts, the files from 4 courts, and all our furniture, you name it. We've pulled it all together. We've merged the 4 courts very successfully, and I'm very pleased and proud that under my leadership, the Simsbury Regional Court is a huge success and one of the best courts in the state. We are reviewed every 2 years by the Probate Court Administrator's Office, and our reviews have always been, we've exceeded their expectations in our timeliness in setting hearings, in the management of our files, in our budgeting. We always return money. So my time is now up, but again, thank you for the question. I'm very happy to boast that it's been a great success.
Thank you. Mr. Houlihan.
The 2011 reforms were really a needed step to bring Connecticut probate courts into the 21st century. There are 169 towns in the state of Connecticut. Each one had their own probate court. They did not require the judges to be lawyers. You had very strange things. I had an enormous case out of Washington Depot, where a person had been conserved for being an alcoholic, and he dried out after 3 years. But the conservatorship lasted an extra 12. There were abuses in the system. The system needed to be reorganized and be made efficient. And the 169 towns have turned into, I believe, 52 regional probate courts now. It's the kind of system that is it is a cost saver for the taxpayer, and it guarantees a level of professionalism, both among staff and, of course, among the judges as well, who now must be lawyers. The system did not work well under the old system, and it was insightful to decide that it needed reform, reorganization, and it has achieved much greater efficiencies. The system has worked well. The court has improved substantially. The finances, instead of having 169 different people administering the funds in the probate system, the state of Connecticut does it now with the treasurer. It's a focused point of accountability, and as a result, we can have greater confidence in our probate system. So I judge the 2011 revisions to be a success.
Thank you. Either of you have anything further? Okay, this question goes to Mr. Houlihan. What is the probate judge's role in dealing with persons with intellectual disabilities?
The probate judge has a very sensitive role in dealing with people with intellectual disabilities. And underlying it all is a degree of respect that you accord the person. It's fairly clear, and in some of my own personal experience dealing with people with dementia, that you have varying abilities. And intellectual disabilities, you're going to have strength and you're going to have weaknesses. And underlying all of it, you have to respect the person who comes before you. You have to see where they can participate in decisions, and judgments, and implementation. And you have to determine when the decision needs to be made for them. But underlying all of that, you need to make sure that they are cared for in the least restricted method, giving honor and respect to their abilities as a human being. And it's with that respect that you need to accord everybody that comes to the probate court, whether intellectually disabled or not.
Thank you. Ms. Becker?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What is the probate judge's role in dealing with persons with intellectual disabilities?
The probate judge's role is presiding over a procedure called the appointment of a guardian for a person who's intellectually disabled. So when an intellectually disabled person becomes of majority, the age of 18, and they in most cases still require the assistance of, in the past, usually their parents or a family member. As most people know, as an adult, the law views you as able to handle your own affairs. So in order for a family member who has always helped the intellectually disabled individual or a loved one who's helped them to continue to help them, to have access to their medical records or their financial records, to enroll them in schooling or activities, to assist them with medical appointments, the court has a procedure that is called the appointment of a guardian of the intellectually disabled. There are two kinds of guardianships. There's the plenary and there's the limited. In a plenary guardianship, the person who is the subject of the proceeding, called the respondent, is completely unable to perform various activities that are assessed by the Department of Developmental Services. The Department of Developmental Services will always provide a report, an assessment when an application has been filed, and they will opine whether the person is able to assist in, themselves regarding deciding where they're going to live, release of clinical information, educational programs that they like to engage in all their areas to help them maintain a degree of independence. If they're able to do some of those areas, then we appoint a limited guardian, and whatever the guardian is not, whatever authority the guardian is not given, the person retains. So in sum, as I'm running out of time, the probate courts assist these individuals by appointing guardians who can legally continue to assist them in achieving the greatest amount of independence and also protecting them.
Thank you. Do either of you have anything further on that particular question? Okay. The next question goes to Ms. Becker first. Nationally, some probate judges are denying gender marker and name changes to LGBTQ individuals. Has this been an issue in Connecticut? And what is your perspective on probate courts and LGBTQ people?
Well, probate courts are statutory courts. The judges are bound to follow the statutes. So opinion or preference does not come into consideration in these cases for the judge. If the law allows it and provides for it, then the judge is to follow the law. Legislators make the laws, the judges enact them. As far as name changes go, there are very few requirements in order to approve a name change. The petition cannot be on the basis of fraud. If it's a minor, the parent will apply on behalf of the person. But there are very few requirements when one wants to change their name, and certainly LGBT would not be a reason to disqualify someone for a name change. Again, if it's a minor child and for some reason a name change is not in their best interests, we go ahead and we evaluate that if LGBT was part of the mix. But again, there's no consideration on the part of the judge. As far as gender marker goes, the Superior Court has jurisdiction over the change of gender markers for people who were born in Connecticut. The probate court only has jurisdiction over the change of gender markers for folks that were not born in Connecticut. And again, there are certain statutory requirements that have to be met in order for a judge to grant that. If the judge grants it because the statutory requirements have been proven to the court, then the judge's decree is sent to the state where the person was born. And what we're hearing is that some of the states are not recognizing our decree. We don't have any control over that. But again, the statute's very clear, the requirements that have to be met and the things that have to be proved to the court in order for the judge to grant the petition.
Thank you. Mr. Houlihan.
I have not heard of any cases that have come up raising that issue specifically in the probate courts. And I have some difficulty seeing how that would be. Our court system, I think, treats people fairly and equally and respects the choices that are made and the issues that are presented. So I've not heard of anyone being rejected, and frankly, I would be surprised to hear that. I think the court system is open, it's non-discriminatory, and there just haven't been those situations. I think we're fortunate. There can be issues in other courts. If they reject our court orders, it raises constitutional questions and puts a burden on people to enforce them under the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. But for Connecticut, I don't see that as being a difficult situation, and certainly I think courts have been fair, even-handed, and non-discriminatory in their dealings.
Thank you. Yes.
One comment. I just want to be clear that the probate courts do not get involved in constitutional issues, though. We are a statutory court. The Connecticut legislature passes laws, and we enact them, and we do not have jurisdiction over constitutional issues.
And I was simply making the comment that if courts in other jurisdictions are refusing to recognize the decisions of Connecticut courts, that implicates the Constitution and implicates the full faith and credit clause. Our decisions are to be respected there as their decisions are to be respected in Connecticut.
Thank you. Okay, the next question goes to Mr. Houlihan. What defines a successful case? Do you track outcome measures such as the number of cases or customer satisfaction or something else? Or
usually courts do not have a follow-up, although in Superior Court, occasionally jurors will get follow-up questions, and occasionally the parties will want to know how the judges have performed and how the different parties have performed during the course of the trial. I've not seen that in the probate court system. I've never received a questionnaire. The mark is that you try to do no harm. Most cases go through fairly uneventfully, but there are cases where there are problems in the family, dysfunction in the family that comes out in probate court. And even if the issue that is at hand is relatively straightforward, oftentimes you see old resentments, you see past behaviors coming out and creating a great deal of conflict that needs to get managed, that needs to get resolved, and needs to be addressed head on. You can't ignore those issues. You need to listen, you need to be open, you need to allow people to express themselves, even if it may not be particularly relevant. And then you need to decide. It is important to get to resolution in a probate court. It's important that you listen to the parties, and if there is no agreement, if there's no consensus, then you have to decide, because it's a service to everyone there to have the case move forward. The objective is to execute the will or to have the conservatorship and make sure that the person conserved is cared for in a proper manner. That is a successful outcome. Sometimes it takes a great deal of work, but it's that kind of decisive decision-making and conciliation that's required.
thank you. What defines a successful case? And do you track outcome measures such as number of cases or customer satisfaction?
Well, I don't track the number of cases as the presiding judge in the court. However, the Office of the Probate Court Administrator requires us to, through the computerized system, obviously track the cases, the kinds of cases that we hear and how many. And the 4 towns that participate in the probate court ask us each year to give them that information. Last year, we oversaw about 400 decedents estates. That includes the smaller estates, over 200 other matters, which would be conservatorships, guardianships of the intellectually disabled, the estate in person of minors, termination of parental rights. The conservatorships, we only had about 45 new cases last year, but they are ongoing, where decedents' estates tend to be wrapped up in a year or so. Conservatorships can go on for a long time and have many, many hearings. The way I perceive my success as a judge is by the, first off, the response from the public. I've been elected 5 times now to serve in this post, and nominated on my 6th time now to run for re-election. I've never been overturned on appeal. I don't have a law clerk like Superior Court judges do. I do all the legal research when I have evidentiary hearings or difficult legal factual matters before the court. Sometimes I can spend 10 or 15 hours on nights and weekends researching and drafting my memorandum of decision, which can go a page or 20 pages. And I've never been overturned on appeal, which to me is evidence that I've gotten it right, that people are happy and or they can live with the decision. And as my opponent alluded to, I think people, I try to get people to come to an agreement, because it's a lot easier to live with a decision if you've made it yourself than if someone else has imposed it upon you.
Thank you. Anything further on that question? Okay, the next question goes first to Ms. Becker. Probate judges address a wide range of vital matters, from control of an individual's finances to his or her health care. What do you perceive as the greatest obstacle to justice and individuals' welfare that are handled in probate court? What policies might improve the outcomes?
Well, I think the areas that we struggle with the most in the probate court are usually drug, alcohol abuse, and also psychiatric disability. We just don't have the laws and procedures to really help people like I would like to help them in those areas. We can appoint a conservator for a person who's incapable of managing their affairs, who's an alcoholic, but the success rate is very low, because that conservator cannot force treatment on someone. They can only help them to seek treatment. And the rate of recidivism is so high that it is very frustrating that we're very limited in what we can do. You can appoint, you can have a special commitment for drug and alcohol disease, but again, if you can actually perform the commitment, which is difficult, a bed has to be available and has to be certified as such, and there are many time frames. At the end of the day, once again, you cannot force the person to receive treatment. So we do, it is discouraging that we can't help people more in those areas, and but it's not for lack of trying. So I do believe people receive justice in the probate court. We have a very informal physical layout. We're in a conference room. I don't wear a robe. I don't sit behind a bench. We sit around a conference table. We try and make people feel as comfortable as possible in the least intimidating environment. And I really feel it's important that everyone should have their day in court. They should be heard. They should be able to say what they want to say. And so I do give that a lot of effort, because again, as I indicated, I'll travel to where people are just to make sure that they feel that they've been heard and they're represented, and I do think that we do a good job of delivering justice.
Thank you. Mr. Houlihan.
The obstacles that you find in probate court are generally the same obstacles that you find before you get to probate court. The alcoholic who has lost control of his life, or the drug addict, the treatment, the relapse, treatment again. It is all of those failures that end up coming to the probate court. And the question is, really, who's the quarterback for all of this? And the probate judge has some limited capacity in that regard. But it really involves being able to have a conservator or a family member who is able to start to access the resources, because that's outside the purview of the probate court. And so the frustrations that existed before the conservatorship or the commitment tend to follow on. What the probate court can do is add some order and some structure where it's needed, and the strength of a court order. But you still have the difficulties in the organization of the health services, the treatment services, the addiction services that are out there. How do you coordinate those and get those together? It falls onto the conservator, the person in charge of the commitment. And that, is a continuing frustration for all. And the probate court's responsibility is to try to add as much structure, to try to identify the resources that the responsible parties can go to try and make things occur better than they did before the court system became involved. These are oftentimes intractable, very difficult issues, but they're issues that need to get addressed, and the coordination function, I think, is just a continuing difficulty for the families, the courts, and the others who are involved in the services.
Thank you. Anything further on that? Okay. The last question, we'll go to Mr. Houlihan first. What ideas do you have to improve the work of the probate court?
I think one of the most important things to do is to greet people and introduce them to the system in a positive, friendly manner. I've had many clients come to me in tears because their frustration boils over when they're met with forms and so forth. We need to let the people know that there is a human hand behind the procedures and the formalities of probate court. And that is a primary goal of trying to make it accessible. Try not to because everybody that comes there is in crisis of some sort. There's a parent or a relative who needs a conservator because they can't manage their affairs. They're in decline or they're in addiction. A person has just died and suddenly they're on their own and they're trying to find out what to do. It is difficult, that first approach. And eventually they're going to need to get to a lawyer. And they can't come to the probate judge to be their lawyer. But they can be welcomed. They can be told that the system is logical, that it has an end, that it has a process that will be fair and that they will be heard. It's important to provide them with confidence in the system. And if there are disagreements that need resolution, that you're going to be able to resolve those. I've tried many cases. And trying cases is a very humbling affair. And because you have to realize that other people have perspectives, different experiences, different appreciation of events. And so when you go to those hearings, they need to know that it's fair, they need to know that you're competent, and they need to know that you're going to render a fair decision. And that's what I would do as probate judge.
Thank you. Ms. Becker, yes. What ideas do you have to improve the work of the probate court?
Well, I think every system, every governmental agency, there's always areas to improve. Nothing is perfect. The probate courts have come a long way. Since we regionalized, we've worked hard to streamline a lot of our procedures so we don't have as many forms. It's not quite as intimidating for people. I think it's critical that the staff at the probate court be well trained. I am very fortunate and proud of the staff at my court. I have trained them over the last 8 years, and they are compassionate, kind people. They're the first face of the probate court that people will see when they come in their time of crisis, and they need to feel confident that the people are willing to help them. My staff goes out to great lengths to assist people. There is something in Connecticut that we are looking at now that I think is going to be a good improvement for the probate court, and it's something called unsupervised probate. It's been implemented in Massachusetts and Texas, two very different places. But the theory is that there's some procedures in the probate court that are very cumbersome, that place burdens on people that are unnecessary. If your spouse dies and you're inheriting their entire estate, should you have to file a myriad of forms if it's just you and the creditors are paid? So this unsupervised probate is something that the probate court administrator has been looking at. I've gone to a seminar on it. We're becoming educated in that area. And it provides for the probate court to stand by and be there to resolve disputes if need be, but to not lord over people with forms and create burdens on people. I think it's great. I think it certainly merits looking into more, and I am encouraged that it will further improve the probate courts in Connecticut.
Thank you. Okay.
I also practice in Texas. And the unsupervised works well when things work well. And if it's a simple thing where it's husband to widow, it can't be beat. And it's much less cumbersome, less expensive than the Connecticut process. But it also means that they're unsupervised. And so now I have a case in Texas where you can't get information from the person who's unsupervised, and the person who's unsupervised wants to do this and wants to do that and doesn't want to follow the will. So, you know, there is a happy medium, and for many estates, unsupervised estates would be beneficial, and sometimes you just have to have that supervision to make sure the assets are where they're going, where they need to go, that the bills are paid, and the problems are solved.
So, and I agree, it's a system that you can opt in or out of. And again, the probate courts are very much involved in the process, but they take a role once the will has initially been admitted and the fiduciary has been appointed. They then stand by in the event of a dispute, so that a disgruntled creditor or a beneficiary who's unable to get information can still bring the matter before the probate court. So it would not be a mandatory procedure that you're required to participate in, and that creditors or beneficiaries would be shut out of. That's my understanding to date. We've just started to really investigate it in Connecticut, but I think it's certainly worth looking into. Anything that can improve the system, make it more user-friendly is a good thing for the people of Connecticut.
Thank you. Also, okay, we will do our closing statements, and the first closing statement is Ms. Becker.
So I thank you for coming tonight. I'm very grateful I've had this opportunity to address the folks in the Valley where they're watching or here tonight. And I have a saying that I'm fond of, that experience matters in the probate court. The probate judge is not just a figurehead. As you've probably learned tonight, there's some pretty serious matters that come before the probate judges. They have decisions regarding who gets your property, who's going to parent your children, whether your civil liberties are going to be deprived by a conservator. Very important areas that the probate judge oversees, and there's a lot of power. I believe that a well-educated and experienced probate judge benefits the users of the court. This is my 19th, almost 20th year as a judge of probate. I've been re-elected 4 times. I've been elected 5, but re-elected 4. This is the 6th time. To me, it says that the people, the users of the court and the residents of the Valley are happy with my achievements at the court. I'm quite proud of the regional probate court. It's been a success. I have a vast amount of probate experience. Probate law has been the only area of law that I've practiced. I've committed my entire legal career to probate law and procedure. Prior to becoming the judge of probate in Avon 20 years ago, I was the staff attorney for the West Hartford Probate Court. I was also a private practitioner of probate law. So I have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the probate area, and I believe that it has benefited the people here in the Valley. I think that the regional probate court also speaks to my success. I've been able to budget, hire staff, and operate in a very efficient court. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. William.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. It is the only forum that we have in this campaign, and I think it's a tremendous public service. I appreciate the voters and soon-to-be voters who are here in the audience and those that are going to watch us on television later. Thank you for your participation. The probate court may be your most intimate connection to government in your lives. It's there when you're having serious problems with a family or somebody has died. People arrive at probate court in crisis. At best, it helps families to move forward, but it provides structure and resolution to many of life's woes. I've been encouraged by the bipartisan support that I've received in my campaign. Trial experience is invaluable in handling some of the difficult cases that come through this court. The respect that I've received from those on the other side of cases of mine and of different political beliefs gave me the encouragement to run this race. I have been serving people for 25 years in the Farmington Valley. They bring their problems, we try to resolve them by negotiation, by mediation, by litigation where necessary. It's important to have this broad perspective of what happens in the world. When the developer comes to probate court because they need to, they want to buy a piece of property, it's important that the probate court understand the development process behind it. If for no other reason, maybe one of the beneficiaries is facing foreclosure on his home and needs the sale proceeds. You need the broader perspective that I bring to this because I have been solving people's problems for a long time. I've also had the consumer side of it. I was a guardian for a mentally ill sister. My father-in-law lived with us for over 6 years in his 90s. And with those experiences, I bring all of that to the probate court. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for your participation. I think this is the first time I've had a probate judge candidate tonight, and it's been quite informative, so thank you very much. And this is very good. I like all the questions. Sometimes I've been up here with no questions, so then I get to ask my questions. Okay, as you all finish up writing questions and so forth, I think we'll get started, yes? Okay. We changed plans just a little bit when Ms. Hill could not attend this evening, so we have the candidates for the 8th District Senate seat here sharing the microphone. We have Senator Witkos and Ms. Melissa Osborne as the 2 candidates for the Senate, and we have with us Eleni Kavros de Graaf as candidate for the 17th District House of Representatives. Okay, so without further ado, we will start with questions. And I have a little chart about how we're going to do this so that we go across. All 3 are going to get the same questions. And then you each have a 5-minute time bank, but the only 2 who will probably be doing that are Mr. Witkos and Ms. Osborne, to rebut each other. Right? Yes. You know what? It is what it is tonight, and we're going to go with it. Okay. Top of my pile. For Ms. de Graaf, what experiences have you had that will help you be an effective legislator?
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us tonight. When I called Leslie last night, it was a very difficult conversation. I just want to say that if you are a praying person, please pray for her and her family. And I would also offer that if there's any opportunity in the next 3 weeks for us to be in the same room to answer questions again, I'm more than happy to do that because this is not truly fair. So I will focus on my vision for Connecticut this evening. Some of the experiences that I've had that I think will lend itself very well to being a legislator, I would specifically point to my advocacy work and my board work in our communities. For 20 years, I've served our communities, both in Farmington, somewhat in Simsbury, as well as in Avon. I have been a member of various boards, one with a budget of millions of dollars, especially during the recession when I had to help make some of the decisions that basically kept the doors open. And it's not an unsimilar position to the state that we find ourselves in as the state of Connecticut. I think that my role as an advocate for some of these organizations, I have a very good sense of how the decisions that are made up here affect everyone at this level. And I think that it's important to bring a diversity of experience to the state legislature because, I have a better understanding of what is really going on in people's lives. I started out as an advocate, unfortunately, at a very young age because I had some health issues myself. I've spent a lot of time, obviously, advocating for my own children, but advocating for other people's children as well, whether it be with mental health issues, issues around bullying, issues around poverty. And so I think that is the wealth of experience that I can bring in terms of being a qualified, experienced leader and administrator.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Whitcombs.
Well, thank you. I started my public service when I was a sophomore in high school, joining the ambulance corps, and we used to drive the ambulance to high school every day because we didn't have a lot of daytime volunteers. That was the very beginning of my public safety career in my public service. Fast forward to my time working here in the Canton Police Department. It was one of the best professions anybody could ever have because you see people at their highest points and see people at their lowest points. So it really offers you a different perspective of what people go through in their daily lives. And then I always wanted to become a police chief, and my mentor at the time said, get involved in civic organizations or run for office. So at the time, being an employee of the town and living in the town, the only office I could run for was the Board of Education. So I ran for the Canton Board of Education, won that election. I will tell you that's probably one of my most humble experiences in serving on the Board of Education because you're really dealing with the next generation of leaders and setting up the curriculum that they will embrace to move forward. So I ran for 5 years, or served for 5 years on the Canton Board of Education as the vice chairman. And then I didn't like some of the things that were coming out of Hartford. So folks said to me, Kevin, if you don't like it, then why don't you run for office? So I did. And I ran for state representative, the seat that Lenny and Leslie are going for that's currently held by Representative Legette. And I served for 6 years in the House of Representatives. And then our senator, if you're from this area, Tom Hurley, he retired, so I ran for the state senate because I figured I could get more done in the state senate because there's only 36 senators versus 151 members of the House. I put my feet to the floor, worked my butt off, basically, serving the state senate, recognized by members across the aisle and my own colleagues. That's why for the past 10 years, and most recently I served as the deputy leader on the Senate Republican side because I'm able to work collaboratively with folks to get things done, and I have proven that I can get things done.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne.
So first of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on tonight. It's a great opportunity for voters to see how Senator Whitcombs and I differ on the values and the votes that we will make in the state legislature. So I appreciate that opportunity because as much as Senator Whitcombs and I get along personally, our values and our votes will be very different. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand so they can make an educated choice. I'm an attorney. I've been in practice for 21 years. I spent the first about half of my career in New York City at a behemoth law firm, practicing corporate law for corporations and private equity concerns. I did big deals. I did really big deals. I did $200 billion deals, and that gave me a certain business acumen that I think is really important for a legislator in this day and age with the crises and the problems that Connecticut is facing. To have. I think that we need to have somebody there who understands what drives businesses, what businesses need, because that gives them an idea about the solutions for businesses here in Connecticut. As my family grew, We moved from New York City here to Connecticut to raise our children, and I opened my own family law practice here in Avon. I first served in juvenile court, serving some of the most indigent and needy and vulnerable members of Connecticut. It was there that I came to understand the needs of the different strata of the socioeconomic members of our society. And I think that gives me a unique and broad perspective that's important to have when you're a legislator. And I also became, I'm running out of time, I also became a mediator, which I think is a really critical skill right now. We need people who are willing to bring people together and who know how to bring people together. So whether I'm doing a business deal, getting a business deal done, or whether I'm helping families settle cases in the best interest of their children, that's a skill that is lacking in many cases.
Thank you. Any further? Okay, thank you. The next question goes first to Ms. DeGraw. I am making sure that this goes back and forth fairly. I have a chart here. But Ms. DeGraw will always go first or last so that the two candidates for Senate go next, so you get the best idea of who stands for what. Okay, so Ms. DeGraw, you will answer first for this. What are your plans and or strategies to address state educational funding to the Avon Canton communities?
Well, we definitely have some challenges. We have to make sure that we get the funding that we deserve. We certainly pay a lot of taxes, and we need to make sure that that funding comes back to us. You know, we have for a long time not had a good way to fund education. Our cost of our formula is not the way that we need it to be. So that's the first thing, is that we have to fix the education cost sharing formula. And I think that additionally, we need to make sure that we are really looking carefully at how special education is funded, because we have not done a good job in the past of doing that. I find it frustrating as a parent. I will tell you that as a parent of 2 special needs children, and having advocated for them and having discussed with hundreds of families how they have advocated for their own special needs children, it's something that we really have to look deeply at. Because in our country, we know we have so many children who are facing, whether it be challenges in school or if they're part of the intellectual disability community, how we're going to move forward in order to make them a vital part of our communities, in ensuring that they have jobs and places to live and all of those things. We have to make sure that we are really looking at how we're funding that currently. I would also add that, you know, it's not just special education funding. We also have to make sure that we are prepared to prepare all of our students, whether it's at the K through 12 level or in college, in order to meet the needs of the 21st century, because that is something that we certainly want to grow our base of young people in this state. I think that it's important as well that we do not leave behind either being an average student or a student who is above average, and because that in some ways can be its own special education need, ensuring that people are able to go ahead and that our teachers have the resources that they need, that we have social workers in place, and that the schools are, you know, that's why people move to our district, is for the schools, so we need to make sure that we are consistent in how we fund them, and that's why we've got to fix the formulas in order to do that.
Thank you. Next, it is Ms. Osborne.
Can you repeat the precise question, please?
Yes, one moment. What are your plans and or strategies to address state educational funding to the Avon Canton communities?
Well, I think that the conversation about educational funding is actually a broader conversation, which is the revolution of our property tax system here in Connecticut. We all know that we've been suffering under a regressive tax system in Connecticut for a really long time, and the time has come when we can't move forward under that system anymore. The changes to the federal tax system have wreaked havoc on our revenue system here in Connecticut, with the change to the SALT deductions, the state and local tax deductions that have been reduced under the federal tax system. Property tax values are plummeting in Connecticut, and we've had an over-reliance on property taxes for educational funding for years, and the changes to the federal system make that only more critical. So when we talk about educational funding, we really need to talk about how do we fund the vital core services that we all value here in Connecticut. There are core services that we cannot give up anymore, and what we need to do is revise the entire tax system so that everything that is being spent, whether it's on people with disabilities or education or our roads or digital infrastructure. We need to have an adequate, fair, equitable way of funding those things in a way that will drive economic policy and development here in Connecticut. So when you talk about what are we going to do to return educational funding to the Valley, what we really need to be having is a conversation about how should we be funding educational funding in the state of Connecticut so that we're no longer picking winners and losers, so that no matter where you're born in the state of Connecticut, we can make sure that every child who's coming up in Connecticut has the opportunity for a fair education so that they can be economic drivers and they can be economic participants instead of an economic drain in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Woodcoast. Oh, microphone.
Since 2011, we hadn't had an educational cost sharing formula in the state of Connecticut. It was a straight line appropriation, and depending on what power you had on what committee in the legislature, that individual legislator maybe got more money for the school district. That's why there was a lawsuit filed, you might recall, CJEF, it was known as the Connecticut Juvenile Education Foundation, against Governor Rell. And we recognized the fact, went to Judge McCauser, who said, we are giving enough education dollars out, but it's how it's allocated in Connecticut is the problem. And so this past year, under a bipartisan budget, we tackled that very issue in creating a new educational cost sharing formula, which really gets to the crux of the matter, is dealing with students taking into consideration the grand list of the community, their ability to pay, students on free or reduced lunch, density, English as a special language, and number of kids in special education, and based on the population of that school district. Each of the school districts is going to be phased in over a 10-year period. If you were to gain more money, you would have gotten your money sooner, over fewer years, but if you were losing money because of a drop in student enrollment, you'd have 10 years to reach that plateau. Unfortunately, Governor Malloy, vetoed a budget that was passed, a Republican budget, where we addressed special education costs, the first time ever in our history. When we tried to put that in the negotiated budget, the Democrats didn't want to do it. And we also actually, to safeguard our ECS, we had passed on a unanimous basis almost a bill that would have prevented Governor Malloy or any future governor from cutting ECS dollars to a community mid-year, as he did this past year. The governor vetoed that piece of legislation, and unfortunately my friends on the other side of the aisle, because of political reasons, didn't want to override his veto, and so now it's subject to the axe, unfortunately. And I'm proud to say that's why I got the endorsement of the Connecticut Education Association, because of my commitment to public education.
Thank you. Okay, the next round of questions, we will start with,
I think Melissa
Can I
has.
take a moment?
oh, I beg your pardon.
Thank you.
Yes.
Some of my time bank. First of all, I haven't been elected to anything at this point in time, so I'm not exactly sure why we're talking about Governor Malloy or the Democrats, because Kevin is running against Melissa, not against Governor Malloy or any other existing Democrat. But I would also like to point out, while Kevin did earn the CEA endorsement, part of the reason is that I didn't fill out any union or business-related surveys at all this year, because I wanted to make sure that when you vote for me, you know that I'm going to Hartford conflict of interest free. I am not beholden to any business organization or any union organization. I'm going as a clean slate, going there only to represent the residents of this district and their best interests, not the best interests of any special interest group. And that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you.
And I will echo the same concern that I did not fill out one questionnaire. However, I have a proven track record, and that's why I have received the endorsement of the Connecticut Education Association, along with our economy is so reliant on jobs, the National Federation of Independent Businesses and the Connecticut Business and Industry Association.
Thank you. Okay, we will be switching topics now, and Ms. Osborne will go first on this question. What are your thoughts on how to combat climate change? It says at the local level, but you're running for state office, so let's talk about the state level.
I think that in order to combat climate change at the local level, we need first to acknowledge that climate change is real. It's actually happening, and humans actually have an impact on that. So every policy we make, every decision we make needs to acknowledge the scientific truth that we actually contribute to this, and therefore we can actually make a difference to it. I have a long commitment to supporting the environment throughout my life. In college, I worked for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Throughout my clerkship at the Court of Appeals in New York State, I concentrated on authoring and working on cases that were concerning environmental impact. I worked my first job out of my clerkship. I worked on environmental impact statements. I worked on a column in the New York State Bar Journal magazine titled The Environmental Lawyer. I have shown a commitment to that throughout my career, and even after the last election, I didn't run against Kevin in 2016 because I had a health blip of my own, but while I was in chemotherapy, I served on the Clean Energy Task Force in Simsbury because my commitment to service is deep. I love my community, and I wanted to be able to give back. And again, because environmental policy and an environmental commitment has been important to me. I think that the first place we start is the low-hanging fruit, and we make sure that we're making smart investments in environmental policy to drive growth in the environmentally friendly industries, to make sure that we're capitalizing on all the clean energy sources that we have. We're doing things like disincentivizing idling of cars. Every little bit we take, every bite we take at the apple gets us to that goal.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. In 2008, Connecticut passed the Connecticut Global Warming Solution Act. I supported it. It was made Connecticut a national world leader in the fight against climate change. It requires a mandatory reduction of the greenhouse gas reduction levels in 2020 and 2050. Furthermore, in 2007, Connecticut passed the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I voted in the affirmative for that. Basically, it's a cap and trade program to target the Northeast Middle Atlantic states from the electric power generation, requires them to reduce their CO2. And lastly, my last comment on this topic is that when I was the top-ranking Senate Republican on the Energy Committee, we created the first in the nation Green Bank, which allows for public-private partnership dollars to provide for renewable energy sources, and very proud of that accomplishment. So those are my issues for that question.
Thank you. Do either of you, do you have a rebuttal? No. Okay. We'll go down to Mr. Grotham.
Well, the bottom line is, if we don't have a planet, none of it matters, right? So I think there are quite a few things that we could be doing. I mean, we certainly have seen efforts towards, potentially banning plastic bags in the state of Connecticut. That's one way to go. We also need to get as many electric cars on the road as possible. That would be a significant reduction in greenhouse gases for us. We used to lead the nation in green jobs, so it's interesting to hear about the Green Bank. The Green Bank, unfortunately, has been raided multiple times, and so that's a problem. And we have to get back to absolutely focusing on green jobs, because not only they're a win-win. I mean, we're going to obviously aid the planet, but as well, and especially our state, but as well, we need to make sure that we are bringing more jobs back to Connecticut, and that's one way that we can do that. It's interesting to see that we have, repeatedly blocked Tesla coming into the state. I've actually heard about that on several doors. I had one gentleman, that was his one specific issue. He really didn't care about anything else, so we have to be looking at, what are we doing to support that. We also have to be looking to incentivize alternative energy, specifically solar. We are not as well set up for wind unless it's offshore as many other states. I would suggest also that the reason that we really need to be focused on climate change is because it comes down to public health. The reality is, after, speaking with so many thousands of constituents in the community, I recently held a forum on tick-borne illnesses, and the problem with the ever-growing population of ticks has to do with the ever-growing heat of our planet, and especially, we're sort of ground zero for tick-borne illness. So we have to make sure that we are really making a concerted effort in our state specifically against this, because our public health is at risk. That's why our Attorney General was focused on making sure that he was participating in the lawsuit, or Connecticut was participating in the lawsuit because of all the downwind pollution. So we have to be focused all the time on this, and I agree with Melissa, these are facts. This is not speculation at this point, and we are, especially after the report last week, we are in dire need of making sure that we save our environment.
Thank you. Next question, we begin with Mr. Whitcombs. What would you do to stabilize and generate additional revenue in the state?
I think we've done that in the beginning from last year with the passage of the bipartisan budget. As one of the leaders that was in the room, we actually were able to accomplish a feat that many thought was impossible, and that was to put fiduciary controls in our budget that had never been there before. We actually passed a constitutional spending cap, something that the voters had asked for since 1992 when the imposition of the income tax was generated. We passed a bonding cap, a volatility cap, and a spending cap. Those are some mechanisms that we have in place to control our spending. I think we should look at how much revenue is generated in the state prior to looking at additional revenues. Our first choice cannot be running to tax additional folks in the state of Connecticut. And I think that's what this election is all about. As I'm going door to door and meeting a lot of different folks, they're saying we're taxed enough, learn to live within your means. There's certain efficiencies in our state government that we can look towards to find savings. For example, the State Contracting Board has said that if every year the state had gone out and done an additional RFP for contracts that had expired, we'd save anywhere from $300 to $400 million per year, rather than just an automatic renewal. And that's something that has not harmed anybody. It's just competitive bidding.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Osborne.
We're looking at two sides of the same coin. We're not looking at just generating additional revenue. We're also looking at places where we can save and should save money. You know, I did some research into this recently because one of the things that I've always thought that a lot of people talk about is why isn't government run in the same efficient manner that any business organization would expect? Why are we not applying these gold standard, Six Sigma, lean efficiency types of programs in state government? And it seemed like a no-brainer to me. And one of the things I discovered, because you know, in order for lean efficiency and Six Sigma to work, you've got to have the data. You have to understand what it is you're working with. And I found out by speaking with one of the state's leading economists recently that we don't actually have data here in the state of Connecticut. We don't have one single full-time person devoted to coordinating data in the state of Connecticut. For instance, Indiana has 35 full-time state data center employees, and they have 6 professional grant writers. So if we don't understand what the animal is that we're dealing with, how can we possibly say how we're going to make it operate more efficiently, more leanly? For instance, each single state agency goes out and contracts and purchases their own software. All the software is incompatible. This is just one example of vast waste that we experience in our state agencies, and our state agencies can't coordinate with our municipalities, and how can we possibly bring best practices to the table if we don't understand what we have? I agree completely with Kevin about crony no-bid contracts, about RFPs being necessary for the renewal of every contract, and this is a topic I've been going on about for a really long time, and it's one of my passions, is eliminating waste and government corruption and making sure that government works for us in a lean, efficient manner, just as we have to do with our family budgets, especially in difficult lean times.
Thank you. Do you have a rebuttal, Mr. Woodcosser? Okay. I'm just asking.
You don't disagree about everything, you really don't.
Oh, I think there are a few in here that, Mr. Groff.
I would also echo some of what they said. I think that, you know, for years people have talked about efficiency, and I sit here running as much as a frustrated citizen as I am a committed public servant. Because the reality is that there's a lot of processes that just have not been brought into the, pardon the cliche, 21st century. I recently was told a story on a door about someone who is doing something for the state, and they were encouraged to come in to watch a specific video, and at the same time, the mileage was going to be paid, and they had to come in, you know, the whole thing was a waste of time. You know, the reality is it was a video that probably could have been put up on YouTube had they had the technology to do that. So not only is it that we need the data, for sure, we absolutely need the technology. We're behind. I had a conversation with our Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, about what she had to accomplish 8 years ago just to get everything online and to make starting a business in Connecticut easier. These are some of the things that are just absolute common sense no-brainers that, as the wife of a small business owner, I can tell you, the way if he was running his business the way some of this technology is, it would be out of business. The bottom line is that we've got to make sure that there are people in place, and I would even say, you know, we have to start looking at things when it comes to these programs, and when you see, you know, it's going to sound shocking coming from a Democrat, I'm sure, but, you know, perhaps we should be looking at a zero-based budget. The reality is, sometimes these programs that we have absolutely no idea whether or not they are working to the best capacity, or whether or not they are, you know, fully operating in a way that we want them to. We need to go back and look at things in a way that, you know, we don't mind paying taxes if they're spent well, right? And we have to have roads, and we have to have police, and we have to have certain state services that we all count on. But it better be efficient, and it better be well spent.
Thank you. The next question will first go to Ms. DeGraw.
Sorry. Me again.
If Roe versus Wade were to be overturned or severely limited, would you support a woman's right to choose here in Connecticut?
I support a women's right to choose here in Connecticut and all across the United States. I think I would like to make it absolutely clear that while we do have a codified choice at this current juncture in our history, and we do not have a trigger law in the state of Connecticut, this election matters. All elections matter. And who you elect matters. And if choice is an issue to you, while in the past it has not always been on the ballot, it is most certainly on the ballot this year. And I will tell you that as far as I'm concerned, based on the horror stories that I have heard and based on my advocacy up at the Legislative Office Building, and having a state senator say to me, would you want your daughter to have an abortion? I can tell you that any woman that I know that has ever had to have one, it was not an easy choice. It was not a choice arrived at lightly, but the reality is that in order for women and for lives to be saved in a variety of circumstances, abortion needs to be legal. And that's all I can tell you.
Mr. Whitcoast.
So I would like to refer everybody to a Connecticut Mirror article where there was a panel discussion led by Representative Matt Ritter, as the majority leader in the House. And the title is Panel, Women Would Retain Right to Abortion in Connecticut if Roe versus Wade is overturned. So I think there's a lot of hysteria out there in the public that this is going to be an issue in the Connecticut General Assembly. I don't believe it's going to be an issue. I don't think it's ever going to come up in the General Assembly, and it's not going to be overturned in the General Assembly. It's already codified in our state statutes. It's not going to change.
Thank you.
Question.
Excuse me? Thank you. Ms. Osborne.
So I don't think, Senator Whitcoast, you actually answered the question. And the audience and the voters and everybody at home deserves an answer to that question, because right now our Senate is tied 18-18. And Senator Whitcoast is essentially the tie vote on an issue that is critically important, not to the hysterical women in the room, but to every member of our society. Because the issue of choice doesn't affect just women, it affects men, it affects the economy, it affects a woman's right to self-determination, it affects her right to pay equity, it protects her right to support her family. So absolutely, my answer is absolutely, unequivocally, without doubt and no hesitation, I support a woman's right to choose. I support it now, I've supported it in the past, I will support it in the future. That being said, it's irrelevant what the current state statutes say about choice, because make no mistake, there is a very serious contingency that would be more than happy if they were to come to the majority in the state of Connecticut to have that law overturned. And I'm going to tell you one anecdotal story. When I was taking a couple of years off from public service to instead have breast cancer, I did go to the state capitol, one of the first times I've been to Sagraw, and we were rallying for Planned Parenthood. Now, I had about this much of hair, I think, and it was really, really obvious that I was a breast cancer patient. And I approached a representative coming out of the chambers, and I said to him, please, I understand you may not support Planned Parenthood for other reasons, but it is the only line of defense for indigent women, for breast cancer screenings, for mammography. And the man looked me in the eye and said, why should I care about that? Why is that my problem? Women's health is everyone's problem. We are your mothers, we are your daughters, we are your friends. Reproductive health, it's all important. I will support it.
One thing I've always enjoyed about Candidates Night in Canton is the respect that everybody has had for opposing points of view. I think we all have strong opinions about lots of these issues. Tonight is for people to hear the candidates' points of view, period. The rule is that if I have to stop 3 times, we're going to stop the whole thing. So let's not go there, okay? Senator Whitcomb.
Thank you, Meg. The reason why I said it's never going to happen is maybe because I've been up in the legislature for 16 years now, and I know the composition of the makeup of the legislature, and I know what gets through to a committee vote and what doesn't get through to a committee vote, and it's not going to come to a committee vote. And if it does, I'm not going to support it. If that's the answer you're looking for, there's my position on it. I would not vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. I think it's embedded in our state statutes. It's accepted past practice in our state, and I wouldn't vote to change it. But I also want to talk about some of the things that I'm doing when I'm labeled as not supportive of women's health. Just recently I was named I was given in 2018 the Patient Hero Award for advocacy for breast cancer tomosynthesis 3D dimensional mammogram testing. I was awarded the 2018 Legislative Champion Award from the Connecticut Association of Optometry. 2018 Connecticut Podiatry Association recognition for my advocacy on common sense, patient-friendly healthcare policies. I've got a proven track record of my role in the policies that affect all of you in this room and what I'm doing for you as far as healthcare is concerned. And I don't go gender specific. It's everybody deserves quality healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't see where my time bank is.
You have 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
Oh, well, hold on to your hats. So, the few surveys I did fill out this year reflected the reasons I was running this race to begin with. The reason I ran this race in 2014, because one of the first things I learned about Senator Whitcomb when I looked at his legislative record was that he voted against a woman's right to receive emergency contraception at a hospital after a rape. I'm endorsed by Planned Parenthood, I'm endorsed by NARAL, and I'm endorsed by NOW. Those endorsements reflect the values and the rights that we have in America right now that are on the federal chopping block. Senator Whitcomb cannot vote to overturn Roe v. Wade because it is going to be overturned at the U.S. Supreme Court. State legislatures are going to be the last line of defense for a woman's right to choose. I'm really happy to hear Senator Whitcomb say that he wouldn't vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm going to take that to also mean that he wouldn't vote for legislation that would, I'll let him speak for himself, I'm going to assume it means that he wouldn't vote for legislation that would curtail a woman's right to choose in the state of Connecticut. We need something more than that. We need somebody who understands that a woman's right to avoid a pregnancy after a rape comes above and beyond any other right that might be implicated. We need a senator whose votes reflect our values. We need a senator who understands that women's health care, everyone's health care, is critical, not just for the right human reasons, but for the drivers of our economy as well. We have some pre-existing condition legislation here in the state of Connecticut, but it's not loophole free. And I'll tell you, as a small business owner who provides my own health care insurance, it would be a really economically bad decision for our state if small business owners like me would have to close the doors of their business to go work for a corporation or for the state government in order to get pre-existing condition health care coverage. I employ a paralegal, a receptionist. And I'm just one small business. And you ask small businesses, the number one thing they need in order to thrive in the state of Connecticut is healthcare insurance that's affordable and accessible to them and to their families and to their employees. So it's not just the right human thing to do, it's the right business thing to do. Again, I'm endorsed by Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and NOW, because these are the values that I stand for. These are the values that I saw that were in danger, both federally and from a potential Republican-controlled, conservatively Republican-controlled state legislature that could absolutely and absolutely would curtail a woman's right to protect herself. And by the way, emergency contraception is not an abortifacient, just for those of you who are confused about that. Emergency contraception prevents a pregnancy from occurring to begin with, and for people who are pro-life, that should be even more of a concern, because emergency contraception can prevent a pregnancy from occurring to begin with, and thus avoid the need for an abortion.
Thank you. Mr. Witkos?
Okay, here we go. We're going to push Grandma over the cliff if the Republicans get in charge. We're going to do all these really bad things. I'm sure each of you are sick of hearing that talk in politics, because let's talk about what we can do, what we're going to do, not guess what the other side's going to do. And I thought, Melissa, you said that you weren't filling out any surveys this year, but then you just said you did a few surveys, the ones that you did. So did you do them or didn't you do them? Because I'm confused on that answer. And the piece of legislation that she's talking about, this goes back 11 years ago. And let me fill you in on that very quickly before my time runs out. There was an assault on the Catholic churches that year by certain legislators. In this particular year, they wanted to, it was called the Plan B, or Morning After Pill, not Plan B. Morning After Pill was the dumb name of the emergency contraception. And I had supported a bill that would have allowed for the Catholic hospitals, the 11 of them in our state, to contract with an independent provider. So if somebody came to that Catholic hospital and said, I would like to receive medication because I was raped the previous evening or that day or whenever, that Catholic hospital could immediately contact an independent provider who was in the immediate vicinity, and then they would take over the care of that individual, so it wouldn't be somebody on the hospital staff, because it was against the church's tenet. And unfortunately, the Democrats who were in charge said, no, we're not making a special exemption for Catholic hospitals. And so the bill, that part was stripped out, and they said Catholic hospitals will be forced to administer a morning after pill, and I just couldn't support that because of that reason. But there was a bill previously which would have allowed that to happen. So thank you.
Thank you.
To clarify, I think that the record will reflect that I stated that I had not filled out any economic surveys, any business surveys, any union surveys, because I want the residents and the voters of this district to know that I'm conflict of interest free from economic persuasions. I'm absolutely clear on what I stand for and what my values are. And I am absolutely clear that no religious organization has any right to hold themselves out as an emergency room provider and deny a woman the right to emergency contraception after a rape. On that, I am crystal clear. And I'm a woman of faith, and I am a member of a fairly conservative religious community. And I am confident that my right as a woman to avoid a pregnancy after a rape absolutely supplants my right as a religious organization to decide to open up shop and provide emergency room services in that instance. In that instance, absolutely, absolutely, my right trumps.
Okay, thank you. Can we see the time bank for the Mr. Witkos and Ms. Osborne, please?
She has 5 minutes.
Okay. We'll get that for you in just a second, but let's move on to another question. I told you there were some controversial ones. I have a big pile here tonight. So, this one goes first to Ms. DeGraw. Do you support arming our teachers in our schools?
Lighthearted topic after the last one? I do not support arming our teachers in our school, and I will give you an example. My dad's a pilot, a commercial airline pilot, and after 9/11, there was a lot of discussion about arming pilots because, well, with all due respect to the first responders, both at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center, our first responders were flight attendants who died brutal deaths on those airplanes prior to those airplanes being hijacked. I say that as the daughter of a flight attendant. At the time, when there was discussion about sky marshals versus arming our pilots, I can very clearly remember my dad saying, "This is such a bad idea." I was raised in the state of Virginia. I was raised around hunters. This is not a anti-Second Amendment thing for me by any stretch of the imagination. But I do remember as a child that there was a co-pilot who had sadly mental health issues, and he decided to crash an airplane as his suicide with people on it. In much the same way as that is, something that you could not have predicted, you also cannot predict what someone is going to do once they have access to a weapon. Additionally, my dad didn't want to be in a cockpit with someone who was armed because you just don't know their state of mental health, unfortunately. And in a school environment, I can think of all the ways that can go wrong, especially regarding some of the laws that we have. While you are not allowed to keep armed weapons, I believe, around children under 16 years old, you can keep the ammo here on the table and the gun right here, and that's legal. And we certainly wouldn't want any of those guns ending up in the hands of children or anyone else who should not have those weapons. So no, I am absolutely not for arming teachers. And I don't think most teachers would agree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Whitkos.
I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think I would be supportive of that. I think that there's other avenues, whether a school has a school resource officer, who's usually a non-police officer, working in the schools by doing other duties besides just being a security guard. After the Sandy Hook issue, the town of Enfield had asked for special permission because schools are gun-free zones to hire ex-military to serve in the school district on an armed basis. So we granted them that permission, and it didn't last very long because of the cost factor involved with it. I think after time goes by, some people feel a little more relaxed, so the school's no longer doing that. So I don't think I would support allowing teachers to be armed in the school.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne.
So the answer is no, I wouldn't support arming teachers in classrooms. What I would support is a ban on bump stocks, which Mr. Whitkos voted against this year. I would vote in favor of the law we passed this year, which temporarily removes guns from people who just had restraining orders placed on them after a domestic violence incident. And I would support that because as a family law attorney and an attorney who's worked extensively in juvenile court and has worked extensively with victims of domestic violence, I can tell you that that is the single most dangerous moment in one of these cases. When you work in juvenile court, you work under contract for the state, and that's where I went and learned how to litigate after doing my corporate career. And the only case in which I ever had to represent somebody with a fatality was a case in which the woman had gone to the family court and applied for a restraining order. And she was not, in the eyes of the court, able to demonstrate that there was imminent harm that was going to happen to her. And the family court was dead wrong on that one. And less than 48 hours later, she was murdered by her husband. These are the most critically difficult moments in these cases. It is absolutely critical that people who we know are violent and have a propensity toward violence are not given access to guns. The CCTV report on domestic violence just came out, and 80% of the fatalities that we've experienced here in the state of Connecticut for domestic violence were perpetrated by somebody with a gun. I think it's important.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, the next question goes to Ms. Osborne. What is your position on paid family leave? If elected, would you work to ensure that the legislation that passed out of committee last year will pass in this next legislative term?
Without speaking specifically to that specific legislation, because again, I want to come with a clean slate and I don't know what the new propositions might be. I support the concept of paid family leave. I think that when we're talking about gender equity, when we're talking about women's rights, when we're talking about the pay gap that exists for men and women, paid family leave is a proponent of virtually every other civilized country. It is antithetical to me, and just a curiosity why we don't have it in America already in this day and age. So absolutely, I would support paid family leave. It's really critical when we're talking about the pay gap, when we're talking about a woman's right to support her family, her ability to support her family, that we look at paid family leave as part of that, because there's so many families where a woman simply has to choose not to work at all, and loses the opportunity to climb the corporate ladder to further her career. So while women have equal opportunities mostly directly out of college and in the earlier parts of their careers, the fact is that many of us have to end up making choices between our careers and between childcare. So paid family leave is a really critical component of equalizing the playing field for women in the workplace and equalizing our ability to support ourselves and our children when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Witkos?
I consider that another unfunded mandate on our businesses. That's why we're one of the most unfriendly business states in our country, usually ranked towards the very bottom. That is something that a benefit package that an individual can work with their employer on to see if they can sustain it. How can you tell a business that has 3 or 4 employees, I'm taking a leave and now you're going to have to cover me for X amount of period of time? And we tried to work on something during the past legislative session regarding that issue. Weren't able to do it to get it across the finish line. In fact, it was so poorly written that the Democrats who hold the majority in the House of Representatives couldn't even get it out of their own chamber because they didn't have the votes to pass it. So while it's a great concept and we think that everybody should have it, it's one more thing that puts Connecticut lagging behind. I wanted to talk a minute while I still have some time about the bump stock bill. Now, I spoke to a group of 8th grade students in Avon. I gave them an example. I said, how many of you have ever heard of the hovercraft, where you stand on and it propels you, and they all raise their hands? I said, that probably costs about $350. I said, imagine if the state of Connecticut said to you, starting next week, those are banned in the state of Connecticut, you need to turn them in within 30 days, and we're not going to pay you for them. How many of you think that's fair? And none of them raised their hands. And I said, well, that's against the Constitution. It's called the taking clause. The government can't automatically just arbitrarily say, this item is now illegal, you have to turn it in, we're not paying for it, and if you go past the 30 days, you're going to be charged with a felony charge. I had supported a bill that said, it would set it up almost like the assault weapon ban many years ago, which says, as of this day, prospectively going forward, you can't purchase in the state of Connecticut, but if you own it, you have to register it. And that was something I did support. So Melissa's a little off on how she's trying to skew the argument on this, so I just want to make sure I set the record straight. And during my next question, I'll address the other issue as well. Thank you.
May I ask how much time I have left in my bank? You have 10 seconds.
How much does Mr. Witkos?
I would posit that since I'm up here by myself, if you want to give them
No.
2.5 and 2.5. Okay.
But thank you.
What do you think on that for a second?
I'm going to take it. Hovercrafts don't kill people, bump stocks do. Any life that is saved by a ban on bump stocks is worth every cent of it.
I use that as an example when I was speaking to 8th grade students, so it made it easier to understand when you talk about taking clause.
Okay. Mr. Crowe.
Okay, I'd like to take it back to paid family medical leave, which I like to think of actually as earned family medical leave. I would like to point out that it really is not, there were a lot of small businesses that last year during the campaign to get that legislation passed, many small businesses signed on to that. And the reason they did is because it's expensive to train employees. And when your employee has to unexpectedly go out, or if it's an expected pregnancy, or for many other reasons, including they have to take care of a sick parent, you should not have to decide between being a good employee and being a good family member. We talk a lot about family values, and I think that that is something that is absolutely crucial to our families, is that they have this earned family medical leave. And it does, the way it has been passed in many states, it is not a tax on an individual. It is, however, earned, and you can carry it from job to job. So I would say that it is something that I would be interested in looking at and passing under the right circumstances as far as making sure that the legislation is worded well. Additionally, when we are surrounded by states who have it, when we talk about trying to make Connecticut a more attractive place to start a business, to maintain businesses, to retain our large corporations, if we are not attractive to employees, I don't know how we're going to do that. And so when you're seeing it passed in states around us and the campaign continues across the country, we have to be more competitive. And that is one of the ways in which we can do that. So I would suggest to all of you to, if you have questions about that, to certainly look up some of the information around it, because we have all been in a situation, whether it's having a child, being the spouse of someone who's having a child, having to care for an elderly parent, having an unexpected parent who's ill who isn't elderly, as was the case for me last year. I think that we all have to think about, you know, what it means and what it means to our families.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to another topic. And I still have a pile of questions here, and I'm sorry, we are not going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to read two that are sort of, not exactly, but they are somewhat the same. They're both about business. How can Connecticut work more effectively with small businesses, business owners, the college and university system, and the technical high school system to ensure that young graduates are ready for the workforce? And the other one is, Connecticut is often characterized as an unfriendly climate for business and economic development. Is that classification fair and true? If so, what can Connecticut do to become more business friendly? They're both about business, they are a little different. And that first goes to Mr. Brown.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer first, which one to answer first. We certainly have been labeled an unfriendly business climate. That is just reality, and some of the reasons for that have to do with taxes. But I will tell you that 20 years ago, when my husband started the business that he has now and employs 45 people in Middletown, there was a reason why we chose to stay here, because Connecticut is a wonderful state, and even though there are some challenges to having a business here, it is worth raising a family here because of our wonderful educational system. Certainly we have some of the best healthcare in the country. In terms of businesses staying here and retaining, we do have an ecosystem problem. We have incredible flagship universities where we have students from all over the country come, and then somehow we have to do a better job of retaining them. An idea that I thought was mine, but apparently New York State had it as well, is as we have this looming financial crisis of student debt, one of the things that we need to certainly look at is perhaps partial loan forgiveness in return for these incredibly talented students staying here and working either for our corporations or small businesses. It would work, I would think, somewhat similar to the Teach for America plan, where your education was paid for, and then you were assigned to work in a certain community, often a rural community, where they needed good qualified teachers. In terms of also incentivizing businesses, I think it's important that we make sure that the tax structure is such that it doesn't kill our small businesses. I mean, they literally employ half of our state, so that is a significant thing that we have to look at. I would also say, the other night I had the pleasure of speaking to someone who owns an engineering firm in Farmington. They live in Canton. And one of the programs that they have is they have multiple internships and things that they do with various universities, specifically CCSU. And you may not know, but CCSU retains 85% of their graduates into Connecticut, into work programs. And so I think that that's something really important, that we look to more programs like that in order to help our young people fall in love with Connecticut the way that I did 20 years ago and to want to raise their families here like I did.
Thank you. And next goes to Mr. Whitkos.
Saving a couple of headlines. Melee seen as Connecticut economy shrank in 2017, ranking 49th among states. Restaurant tax increases proposed by Connecticut lawmakers. Connecticut economy still lags behind the region. High cost, low growth dropped state's CNBC business ranking. Connecticut wage growth 5th slowest in the U.S. Folks can say it's partisan politics, but it's not. The facts speak for themselves. What we can do when folks are making their business plans, they're looking 5 years out. So every time a bill is even proposed at the General Assembly, folks are saying, what are they doing? Why do you think GE left? They even telegraphed that. They said, if you vote for this budget with all these tax increases, we're out of here. And what happened? We had some leaders in the General Assembly on the Democrat side said, well, you get one less weekend on your yacht. I mean, that's not the message to treat some of our high-paying jobs and our larger business owners. What have we done to combat that and deal with the education things? As the ranking senator on the Education Committee, Higher Education Committee, we streamlined the ability for a community college to create pathways to our four-year colleges, so in 24 different degree programs. If a student wants to save money by going to community college, all of those credits are automatically transferable to one of our 4 CSUs or Charter Oak State College. We've replicated the advanced manufacturing program over at the Nutmeg Community College, which is doing phenomenally well. It's now in 8 of our community colleges. In fact, over at the community colleges in Tunxus, they're offering a program to sophomores in high school. So when you graduate from high school, you already have 30 credits towards your associate's degree. So these are the types of innovative ways that we're working not only with our higher education, but our large employers say, what are you looking for in need of for your employees to substitute those that may be retiring in the future, and requiring our higher education institutions and our high schools, either through VOTEC or the VOAGs, which we've invested heavily in the past couple of years, to make those students ready to enter the workforce.
Thank you. Ms. Oswald.
I love it when Kevin and I find areas of agreement, because I think it makes the differences in us so much more stark and apparent to the residents and the voters. But Kevin and I have a lot of agreements on areas of economic policy. One thing I think we both agree upon is that we need a long-term perspective economic development policy. I think that for businesses to want to grow here and to locate here, we need to give them confidence that Connecticut is open for business. And we do that by using data and using data to drive our economic policy. That's the number one thing. We need to make the types of investments that every business, small or large, wants. We need to invest in human capital. We need to invest in infrastructure. That includes in our digital infrastructure. Again, coming back to the data centers. Data centers are only, we have 17 data centers in the state of Connecticut. There are 300 in the Northeast, and we only have 17 of them. Our 17 data centers combined do not equal the biggest data center in Boston right now. If you're a company wanting to move to Connecticut, or wanting to open in Connecticut, or wanting to grow in Connecticut, why would you do that when we are not providing basic digital infrastructure that is necessary for the 21st century? If you're STEM, if you're any kind of data-intensive company, you can't do that. And to do that, we need to make smart investments. We need to have budgets that reflect our values, and our values absolutely must reflect smart investments that will grow the Connecticut economy. Another thing to do is to go after the federal funding that we're missing out on. The leading state economist, the director of the Connecticut Center for Economic Analysis, opines that we're losing out on $1 billion of federal funding a year. $1 billion of federal funding simply left on the table because Connecticut can't get its act together to go after it. So Kevin and I agree on a lot of things when it comes to economic policy, and I think that we're both thinking the same thing, and that is to drive prospective economic development policy.
Thank you. Okay, one final question, and we'll go first to Mr. Whitkos. Connecticut has a difficult time retaining young workers and their families. What would you do to ensure that talent stays in the state?
We've got to make sure that there's jobs available for the young folks in the state of Connecticut. And not everybody's destined to go to a four-year college. That's why I worked with the unions in the industry to increase the availability for apprenticeship programs for our young men and women to go directly into the workforce, to provide more opportunities for them. I think that we have to make sure that we rein in the costs of our higher education for those that do go to college in the state of Connecticut. It's tiring to hear single and double-digit increases year after year. It's even more deplorable when you see a billboard over on East Hartford that says, "Come to the University of Maine for the same price as going to UConn for United States students." So we've got to rein in some controls over in our higher education to make sure that higher education is affordable. We adopted a program called Live Here, Learn Here a few years ago, which allows for tax deductions for students that went to colleges in the state of Connecticut, stay for a certain period of time. After that, they can deduct off their state income tax. So we're trying to do programs that we can, but we've got to have opportunities for the students to grow in Connecticut, make Connecticut affordable. Yes, realtors, it's very expensive to live in this state, and I think that's my only negative comment about the state of Connecticut. I love living here, raising my family here. It's just too darn expensive. Until we get our fiscal house in order, it's going to remain a struggle for all ages.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne.
Again, we don't have a lot of areas of disagreement on this, but just a personal story. I didn't come from a family of means in any way, shape, or form. I went to Hunter College in New York City, which is a part of their CUNY system, which is the City University of New York. I was able to do that because tuition was $700 a semester. And I worked as a secretary during the day for a television research development company. And I would take the bus after work, and I would go on up to 68th and Lex, and I would go to school at night. And that's how I got my undergraduate degree. I would wait tables during the weekends. I worked as a secretary during the day. But I was only able to do that because New York City had invested in a great four-year college program that was really affordable and payable by the students. I didn't have parent help at the time. I was able to get through law school on a half-tuition scholarship and on student loans. And people can't do that anymore. So I know that every family is hurting. I'm really, really fortunate at this point in time that my son is playing D1 football, and that comes with a great college scholarship. But not every kid has that opportunity, and goodness knows I worry about his head every single game. But you know, you shouldn't have to make those choices. You shouldn't have to make the choices of, is your child going to get a concussion, or is he going to have a full ride to college? So it's really important that we invest in education here in the state of Connecticut, that we invest in vocational education, that everybody has the opportunity to maximize their potential, whatever that potential may be, so that they can have the dignity of employment, and that so our state will become attractive to our children so they'll want to return here.
Thank you. Mr. Groen.
This is certainly the easiest one to agree on. As the first female in my family to go to college, certainly I was really, it was exceptional to realize that benefit, and my family was in a position to help me with that so that when I got out of college I wasn't completely burdened by student loans. But I think that there are fewer and fewer families who are able to give that sort of American dream to their children. So it's not just the vocational schools, it's not as important necessarily in our district, but it certainly is important statewide, you know, our agricultural environments as well. And when you talk about the trades, I mean, certainly there are plenty of jobs that we need filled in the trades. We see how jobs are sitting empty. And when we talk about the implementing those various programs, providing financial support to new graduates, those were never fully funded. So that's something that we really have to look at, because it's important that we move forward in ways to retain all of this talent that is at our flagship universities. And that's with internships, and that's with apprenticeships, and that's with figuring out, you know, some people try a year of college and it really doesn't work out for them, and they realize they'd rather be doing something else. So we have to have the supports in place, and then that way, you know, those people will want to stay here. And again, it comes down to sort of, you know, helping people fall in love with the state of Connecticut. I've never lived anyplace else that had such a negative attitude about itself, and when you look around, it's pretty darn great. So, you know, do we have problems? Yes. Can we fix them? Yes, we can. You know, we got into this together, we'll get out of it together. So, but I think that, you know, it's all of the things that both Melissa and Kevin mentioned.
Thank you. This ends the question part, and I'm sorry we didn't get to every question. There are several in here I would really have liked to have asked also. But we will go to our closing statements. Ms. Leslie Hill did send in a statement, and Mr. Whitcoast is going to read that. I'll remind you that she's running for the 17th District House of Representatives.
Thank you, and thank you on behalf of Leslie for all the kind comments that was said to her this evening. A statement from Leslie Hill. Thank you to the League for hosting this important event, and all of you for coming out to hear from the candidates. I deeply appreciate your understanding of my absence this evening. Early in 2008, I jumped at the opportunity to fill a vacancy on Canton's Board of Education. I was re-elected twice, serving for 8 years, 3 as board chair. In 2015, I was elected first selectman. I have served on the Capital Region Education Council, the Capital Region Council of Governments, and the Farmington Valley Health District. I am proud of my record of collaboration across party lines to set a tone of mutual respect and professionalism between board members, town and school staff, and the public. I have been dedicated to listening and responding to residents and local businesses and considering their priorities when crafting policies. I have worked on 11 town budgets that provide quality education and core services while maintaining Canton's fiscal health, and I've done this under the weight of ever-increasing state mandates and unpredictable, ever-shrinking state aid. Connecticut's economy is, on any list and by any measure, one of the very worst in the country. We have many important issues to tackle, but we cannot accomplish anything unless we start over with a strong economic foundation. I am uniquely qualified to represent our district because I will view every revenue and budget proposal and every piece of legislation with first-hand understanding of its impact on our towns, schools, businesses, and residents, including our most vulnerable seniors and the disabled. Getting Connecticut off the list of the worst state economies and onto the list of the best will be my top priority as I represent the 17th district. It has been an honor to serve Canton for the last decade, and I hope to earn your vote for state representative. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Ms. DeGraw, who's also running for that office.
Again, I thank the League of Women Voters for having this important event tonight. It's based on what I was told for previous events. It's nice to see so many people who've come out who really truly care about our upcoming elections. You know, whether it was serving on various nonprofit boards, whether it's advocating in the schools, whether it's volunteering in church, whether it's wherever I've been in communities across my lifetime, I have stepped up and I have advocated for people, and I have the experience of listening and being able to act immediately when there is an issue. Anyone who knows me knows that that's the first thing that I do, is that I listen, and then I am able to synthesize the information to help get us to actionable solutions. You know, we talked about a lot of things tonight. There were several issues that didn't get mentioned that I think that we really do have to think about, because in knocking thousands of doors this year, they are the issues that come up the most on doors. Once we get past taxes, people are worried about health care. I had a call the other night from someone who said, you have to protect our health care because our daughter has cystic fibrosis and she really counts on the services that she gets within our state. I had another person who has reached out to me multiple times about her intellectually disabled adult son and her concerns about, you know, what's going to happen if something happens to her. We've got to make, we have to make sure that there is a safety net for people who are in those situations. We have people who are concerned, you know, as we said, about paying for college. But just the other day, I knocked a door, and it combines two issues that I think are the biggest issues facing us right now, and that's mental health and the challenge of opioid addiction. She was wearing a shirt with her son's picture and his birthday and his date that he overdosed. And we have got to do better by this district on both of those counts, by our children, by our family, by our extended family, and certainly I hope that if elected, that's something that I can work on and bring to our district, is help in that manner. I look forward to earning a vote on November the 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to the candidates for the Senate for the 8th District, and we'll start with Mr. Whitcomb.
Thank you to the League and the Canton High School staff and students for providing the opportunity for voters to hear from the candidates directly. I want to thank Melissa for stepping up and placing your name on the ballot. It's certainly time away from family and friends and other important commitments in your life that also require your attention, so I applaud your willingness to run. And it's been an honor to serve you, the residents of the 8th District. This election, like all elections, is about choice. Not only will you choose who you want to represent you in Hartford, but for what their party or platform stands for. Under Governor Malloy and Democrat majority rule, Connecticut has struggled with the two largest tax increases in the history of our state. We've witnessed his promises made but not kept. Increasing our sales tax to share a portion with municipalities, the extension of the state employee bargaining contract for an additional 10 years with no layoff clause for 4 of those years, saddling the taxpayers of Connecticut with the Hartford bailout of a cost of $40 million a year for the next 30 to 40 years. The introduction of bills to create a phone tax, a tire tax, a statewide car tax, a doubling of the mill rate for a second home, and the list goes on and on and on. Every major periodical from Forbes to CIA News ranks Connecticut last or near the bottom for business friendliness. We witnessed the lowering of Connecticut's bond rating 4 times during the Malloy administration. I serve because I love this state, I live in, raised a family in. The problem is just too darn expensive. Last session, serving as a leader in the state Senate, I accomplished, as I said before, what people thought was impossible. A bipartisan budget that contained many of the financial restraint and controls that we've been advocating for years. As a leader in the Senate, I have the ability, willingness, and a proven capacity to work with members across the aisle. This year, a constitutional amendment to protect open space will appear on the ballot. It was authored by myself, co-championed by a Democrat state rep from Stratford. Together, we will create history, as this will be the first time an environmental issue be considered for our state's constitution. There's more work to be done as the state faces a $2 billion deficit in the coming year. I will continue to protect education dollars for our towns, fully fund line items for the intellectual and developmentally disabled, all while growing our economy, holding the line on taxes, and once again returning Connecticut to the envious position of leaders amongst our states. Thank you. I hope I've earned your support tonight and ask for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne?
Thank you, Senator Witkos, for your kind words, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and to all of you here and at home who will be watching later on. Thank you for taking an interest in our government and in policy and in your candidates. Senator Witkos is completely right. This election is about choice, and the choices both in the candidates who sit before you tonight and on the national playing field could not be more stark. We come to you at a time when our nation is at a crossroads. How are we going to evolve? How are we going to grow? Who are we going to become? And right now the Senate is tied 18-18. And the economy is absolutely critical, and it's time for us to really change course and revamp our economic drivers here in the state of Connecticut, but that's something that Senator Witkos and I do not disagree upon. What we do disagree upon are the values that, with all due respect, we do think matter. Women aren't hysterical when they think about the right to choice being taken away from them. Women aren't unreasonable or thinking that grandma's going to fall off the cliff when we talk about these issues as being integrally important to us and really, really mattering. You know, my ability in my youth to make a choice would have been the difference in supporting my children, in having an economically viable career, and becoming the lawyer and the attorney and the mom that I now am. That's not a choice we can take away from women in the future. This is an issue of choice. This is a moment in time for every single person in this room and in this district to make sure they get out and they vote their values. And that is why I'm asking for your support on November 6th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to the candidates. This is a moment when we can show our appreciation to them.